Hello and welcome back to another Roley's Wheels. Today we're going to be doing a short film on a subject which I should have done much earlier, but it follows on from an original video on how to upgrade or make your leather seats look a little bit better where they start to crack. And I remember, I think I showed you on how to put some leather dye on the leather seats. But today what I'm going to do is I'm going to address where the leather actually cracks and how to fill in that crack carefully. And then after that, once you've filled it, then you can actually apply the leather dye. So we'll take a little closer look at this. So let's take a little closer look at this driving seat, because the driving seat gets most of the wear and tear. And as everybody knows, with proper leather, it's quite nice to see creasing and cracking on leather, but sometimes, you know, you just want it to look a bit smarter. So if we take a closer look at this now, you can see this is the side bolster, and the side bolster getting in and out of the car gets a lot of wear and tear. It's also happening across the main part of the seat as well. It's sort of cracking. This is a bit more difficult because as you can see, there's lots of little pinholes in the leather. So we're just going to have to see how we get on with that. But for now, I'll have to do another one on this later. But for this particular side cheek, it'll also apply the same to this area as well. Now, when you take a closer look at this, you can see with the leather sort of moving up and down and so on, and the natural form of leather, it's going to crease in any fold that there was on the leather to begin with. But what happens is when this actually creases like this, the leather comes up like this to the top, so it actually forms a little bit of a ridge. And what we want to do is we want to be able to take that ridge off. So by sort of moving the ridge down or sanding it down, you want to flatten it. If anything, you want to try and make a little bit of a dip in it so we can fill over it. So today we're going to take a little look at that. Now, I'd advise you first of all to make sure you clean the seat with a leather cleaner. This is a typical example of one, although I'm not advertising the company, but this is a leather cleaner that I find is quite effective. So you make sure you clean over that leather area first. This is a bit of a gel which you can put onto a cloth and you wipe it over and keep it clean. So we're going to start off with sanding the area. Now I use a wet and dry. It's a fine sandpaper. Don't use anything too rough. If you use anything too rough, you will actually cause the leather to sort of split open a bit and you get little fibres on top, and that becomes a problem. So the thinner and the finer the sandpaper, the better. And if you get an edge of the sandpaper, you fold it over. This is what I tend to find is probably the best thing to do, but an edge is always the best. And then you very carefully run it along the length of the crack itself. Just gently rub it over, and don't press too hard, because when you press too hard, the leather goes down too far and you don't actually get the top of it. So if you can gently just cast the sandpaper over the top of the cracking in that form of leather panel, and that's fine. You can actually run your finger before you start. You can run your finger over it. You can feel a little bit of a ridge over the top of some of it. There's another one here, and it's just really, you know, as you're fine sanding it, you can gently get that ridge off. So you go along the length of it with the sandpaper, and then just cross over a little bit from side to side. Because by doing that, you're going to pick up any sort of fibres that are sticking out. This will have to be done in a couple of stages, because depending on the depth of the crack that you've got, you may have to use the filler twice. So you sort of fill over it, sand it, fill it again and sand it until finally you've got a smooth area. But don't worry if the filler goes over the top a little bit, because you'll smooth that off with this sandpaper, and by the time you put the leather dye on it, you won't even notice it. So this is just an example. So we're just going to continue our sanding. You'll see quite a difference once we apply the filler. And sometimes you'll find you may have to put 2 or 3 coats of dye on it, but you'll probably then make sure you cover the whole of the panel with the dye. I want to talk about the leather dye. There are several different dyes on the market. I can feel now there's no ridge with my finger carefully. You can just, you know, sometimes I'll actually take my glove off and you can feel it with your finger over the top of it. I can just feel a little bit of a ridge here, but do a little bit more of a gentle rub. It's actually quite amazing to see the finished product. And bear in mind that once it's had a crease here, it's always going to want a crease here. So what you're trying to do is, with the filler, transfer that creasing over a wider area rather than just down the middle. So I use a cloth now just to wipe it off clean. I'm just going to gently sand that off. And I've got this one while we're at it. Let's just take a peek at this one as well. So these are some of the tools that I recommend you use. You can get a little trowel, and sometimes you get these from art shops. You can get a set of different shaped trowels, but I like this one best because it's got a little point on it, so you can actually sort of push the filler into the crack. And Furniture Clinic, I'm not advertising for them either, but I tend to find that Furniture Clinic is one of the better ones to use, although there are some very good products on the market for leather filling. But I got a little pot, and it's like a white cream really. It is a filler. So you very, very gently just take a little bit of filler, just a little bit, and just dab. Don't push too hard. You only need a little bit at a time. And I'm going to put the lid on this filler because you don't need it too long. And just gently work that in. It takes something like about 30 minutes to dry, and that's what you want to do, is to make sure you let it dry before any further paste on it. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit from the bottom here. And where you see this cracking most, that's where you want to apply the most filler really. And then it is a process. Probably once or twice you just need to put this over and let it dry. So whatever remnants you have, you can just pop back into the pot. Make sure you put the lid on again, you don't want it to dry out. And then I'm just going to make sure that I leave the rest of that crack just to dry a little bit. So now we'll leave this for something like about 20-30 minutes. It will dry quicker in the summertime when the temperatures outside are warmer. In the winter time, here we are in January doing this. It is a warmer day actually for January, so otherwise I wouldn't be doing this if it's too cold. But I'm just going to leave this just to set, just put a little bit more on that. I can see it just starting to. You can just sand that off anyway. Any excess, don't worry about it. You just literally just sand it off. It's not a problem. So we'll come back to this in a minute. So now we had to wait a little bit longer than the 20-30 minutes because the weather's a little bit on the cool side. Had it been in the summertime, probably would have dried within 30 minutes. So we waited around about, well, I've left it for about an hour just to dry off a bit. So we've got to the point now where when you just put your hands over it, you can feel it's not tacky or anything. So again, with the fine sandpaper, wet and dry, just gently pass it over it, just gently. Don't press too hard. And basically it'll take any little high points off the filler, and you keep on just sanding it and just feel it gently. It's not bad at all actually. That, let's see where I've been over here. Sometimes you may have to do this twice, 3 times just to fill the gaps up, but this seems to have filled up quite nicely actually, as I say. From that, this is another section I'm going to be doing a little bit later anyway, but I just thought I would just rub some of this into the creasing just to see how that would come out in the first instance anyway. Okay, so when you're finished with just sanding like this, get a clean cloth and just gently wipe over it. Make sure you've not got any dust. I'm leaving that little bit there a bit longer because it was a little bit thicker and it's just slightly, I think it needs a little bit longer, but we'll just do an area just to show you as a demonstration how this is going to work. Okay, so the next stage that we want is to use again the Furniture Clinic, and this is what they call the repair paint, and this is almost like a base coat with a top coat sort of formed into one. It's got a very good coverage, and obviously before you use it, you can see I've used it before, give it a good shake. It is water based, but it will need a good mixing up, and when you do that, I always apply it with a little sponge. Now you can use a brush or a sponge, or you can spray it on, but for little areas like this I just use a bit like rubber foam really, and it just sort of sinks in it, and you can literally dab it on it. So we're going to do this first off now. So I'm going to flip the top off. All you need to do is to put a bit on there. It's going to sink into the sponge anyway, but when you put on there, you just literally keep on dabbing. Make sure you can cover the whole of the area. You probably may have to put 2 coats on to begin with. I'll put a bit more on. And this is quite amazing. When it dries up quite nicely. I would, before you even start putting this liquid dye on, you give the Furniture Clinic the name of your or the colour name of your seat. This is oatmeal, and they do parchment, they do ivory, they do all the Jaguar colours, but I would try it on an area that you don't see first of all to make sure that the colour matches, and it will come out a little bit paler until it's dried, and then when it's dried it goes off a bit darker. So I've just put a bit on there. Don't overdo it, but any areas you think need a bit of extra cover, then you'll see it starting to take shape. So you can see by looking at that now, it's looking better already, and we're just going to let that dry, and when it's dried we'll come back and we'll show you what it looks like. So now we take a little closer look at the seat. It's going to need another very light sanding, and then another coat over it, but it doesn't look too bad. You can just partially see through the dye across here, but if we just very carefully lightly sand gently, do it very carefully, don't press too hard, because this is just nicely just taking the top off that. You can do some circular moves as well, because it then just takes the very top off. A little bit on this one as well. When you've done that light sanding, just make sure that you do rub off any dust. You can just feel over that. You are going to get some creasing, so we're going to dab a bit more of the dye gently on this, and just make sure when you do it, you can just cover most of the area so it's all sort of uniform. This will take probably about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour to dry off. But the good thing is, you know, the chances are once the leather creases in that location, it'll probably crease again, but the flexibility of the paste, the filler paste, will hopefully flex across it. and you may need to put, you know, 1 or 2 more coats on here. It's fine. It's just going to settle off and be the same color eventually, but it does make the seat look more new. I know some people do like the leather creases to be shown, but sometimes, you know, when you start to see the leather material through the dye, it's not quite not quite as good, or not quite as nice really to do that. You just gently, evenly dabbing your way around. As I said before, you can actually use a makeup brush, a very delicate makeup brush to do this, but I prefer using the sponge for doing some dabbing, and it does come out quite nice. And then when we have finally finished this operation, we'll come back and take a final look at it, and then hopefully it'll look much more improved. So we've given some time for the seat to dry off now, and as you take a closer look, the whole of that side bolster looks so much better, and it matches perfectly to the seat. So you can take a little look at this, have a go yourselves, and I hope that this has been helpful to you all, just to see how you can improve the look of your seats and not have those nasty little cracks appearing. So please remember to subscribe, keep on following us, and yeah, keep on watching, because there's going to be a lot more videos coming along very, very shortly. Thank you for watching.